Let's get a word on this and a few of the other big stories of the day. Simon Danczuk is back with us, former Labour MP. There's a lot to talk to Simon about. Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. And let's start then with that story. Mark Zuckerberg, who's chosen to abandon the use of independent fact-checkers. Let's have a listen to what he said on his free speech return.
We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US.
There it is, similar to X. And it's also worth noting, Simon, that Donald Trump was asked about this. He made a comment in a speech yesterday. Here's what he had to say.
I think they've come a long way. Meta. Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it. Actually, I watched it on Fox. I'm not allowed to say that. Say it?
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Probably. What are we making of this, Simon? Is this good for free speech, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, I think we should welcome Mark Zuckerberg's statement yesterday about opening up Facebook and Instagram. I think we need more free debate. And people often say voting doesn't change anything. Well, voting in the United States has clearly changed this. It's made people in the United States be able to share and say what they want on social media much more freely than they could before. So I think that's a positive result. I do find it a little bit amusing on a couple of points that it's not that many months ago that Mark Zuckerberg was saying he wasn't dampening down on free speech, but now he's saying he's opening it up. So he can't have it both ways. The other interesting point I found in the statement that he made is that he's going to move the moderators that moderate these platforms from California to Texas, in the hope that the moderators will be less woke and less liberal, which I think is quite a smart move.
Yeah, and you couldn't pick two states to compare and contrast between California and Texas. You can just see, you know, some fella that works on oil rigs during the day going home at night to be one of the fact-checkers. I ain't going to take no nonsense from them Californians. It's all about to happen. I guess the difference is, and the wider question, Simon, or the area that interests me certainly, is the difference between opinion and fact, or opinion and news. And that's where we seem to be at the moment. And of course you can look at Twitter and find some really entertaining stuff. You can look at the views and opinions of people that you'd never have got to before. But amidst all of that is a little bit of a sewer that you've got to get through. It's almost like a kind of a kind of challenge that, you know, you wouldn't even create on the worst kind of quiz show in the world to wade through before you can get to the actual truth or the real story that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how we all use the different platforms differently. So I'm a prolific user of Twitter, but you've got to be very selective about what you use and what you read, and use all the facilities that are available. So I freely block people. I won't have any nonsense or swearing on my feed. That's for me to choose, isn't it? What comes up on my feed. So I block people, I mute people, and that's what people should do. And you have to, you know, we have to trust people to get to the right conclusion by doing their own research. We can't spoon feed people. Incidentally, I use Instagram for sort of family. It's like a family photo album, you know. So I don't do any politics on Instagram, and then Facebook is something in between, you know. But yeah, I mean, we have to trust people on this. You know, I think community notes works relatively well on X. So Zuckerberg taking a leaf out of Elon Musk's playbook, I think, is to be welcomed. So some sort of light information in the background is welcome, but you can't go banning or refusing people unless they're doing really ridiculous stuff, in my view. Yeah,
that's very true. I totally agree with that. But I wonder whether, you know, and Elon Musk makes great play at saying, you know, this right here is where this is news now. You know, forget what went before, whether it's the Washington Post, whether it's CNN, whether it's the BBC or ITV. This is where you should be getting your news. Now, of course he's going to say that. He owns the thing. I understand that. But is that is that not a fairly dangerous path if people now take to social media for largely unchecked material in order to form an opinion on what's going on?
Yeah, it is fascinating how the landscape, the media landscape has changed so radically. The news landscape's changed so radically in a relatively short length of time. I go on Twitter and then root out the mainstream media to gather my views. I click on Telegraph stories or The Sun or the Daily Mail or the Times, and then have a look at the story. I even check, I even read stories on The Guardian. Don't hold that too much against me. But there is some good journalism in there. So people have to take a rounded view. That's my advice. But you wouldn't rely just on comment on Twitter, or on X rather, to tell you what's going on in the world, because as you pointed out, you get some ridiculous so-called facts which clearly aren't reputable.
Clearly aren't. We are going to talk in a moment about Prime Minister's Question Time because, of course, the grooming gang inquiry did come into that. Badenoch was calling for this idea that we should have another inquiry. Starmer very much against it. I know you've got some comments on that, Simon. We'll come to those in just a moment. We'll take a brief pause. There's the question: who do you trust with your news? I mean, we're out there. If you want to find out what's going on in the world, where would you look? Where would you look, and who would you take notice of? Who do you trust in that respect? I can't imagine. I mean, yes, as Simon just said, you can find stuff on Twitter, but I think you've got to... It's kind of like an episode of Squid Game. I think that's what I was trying to think of earlier. You've got to get through some ridiculous challenge in order to find a nugget or a scintilla of truth. And even when you find the truth, it'll then be countered by other people who say, no, this is not true at all. This is what's true. And then you go, right, OK, is that true? So a lot of people seem to think it is. There's a lot of endorsement for that comment. Maybe the truth wasn't the truth. And we're in this kind of sort of hall of mirrors nonsense about where the hell is the truth. And the truth is in the mainstream media. The mainstream media in this country certainly is the most trusted source of media and information anywhere on planet Earth. You see that, and particularly in our newspapers, where I know there is a great sort of stereotype. Oh, they just make stuff up. They don't. You get fined gazillions if you make stuff up. Do they get it wrong? Sometimes. Do they get it wrong a lot? No. Rarely. And stuff is fact-checked. It's double and triple sourced. It doesn't even get to print unless it is. And yeah, there will be errors, and there has been over the years. Nobody would dispute that. But on balance, of the trillions and trillions of column inches that have been written for over 100 years in Britain...
Cyril Smith, who I called out as a paedophile, looking at many historical cases, it hardly touched upon the rape gangs that we're talking about here. That's the truth of it. I think Rotherham gets a brief mention in the whole report. They spent 10 days looking at the whole issue. And so what it does require is this national inquiry that will really identify not just the perpetrators, which is exceptionally important, but also those who covered it up. So the public servants, the politicians, the senior police officers who helped cover this up for so many years, who ignored the victims, have to be identified through an inquiry and then, if required, prosecuted. And that's what the British people want. And Starmer is denying that.
Yeah, and you found yourself up against people saying you might want to keep quiet about this, Simon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I was the MP from 2010 to 2017. The Rochdale rape gang scandal broke in 2012 when these people went to trial, and I knew very little about the subject. But what I did say at the time is that ethnicity and religion were key factors in the abuse of these white girls, because, the culture amongst these Pakistani men was that the white girls didn't matter. And so I called that out. But at the same time, I had senior Labour politicians telling me, and I ignored them, but they were telling me to not mention ethnicity, to not mention the religion of the perpetrators, because they believed it would cost votes, it would cost Labour votes. And I think that is despicable.
It's an outrage. And, of course, you weren't the only person that suffered this kind of impenetrable response that came back. There were council leaders saying the same thing, local politicians, law enforcement. No one wanted to get involved with this for all of those reasons. And you think, what sort of world have we lived in? And, of course, a lot of this comes post other inquiries into child abuse. I'm thinking about the Catholic Church. You know, we had films like Spotlight that were, you know, attempting to shine the torch in that direction. So it's not as if we hadn't already experienced the tricky nature of institutions or people or organisations or groups covering things up. It's not like it was 1950. You know, this is like 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And the suggestion is, because we haven't learnt the lessons, and I think this is true, that this type of abuse is still ongoing. People will say that. You mentioned other whistleblowers. I made a big deal of it between 2012 and 2016, campaigned very heavily on child abuse and getting answers to it. But Anne Cryer before me, the Labour MP for Keighley, was told not to talk about the ethnicity of the perpetrators. Sarah Champion, the Rotherham Labour MP, who's still in Parliament, lost a job under Jeremy Corbyn because she was insistent upon challenging these issues. And you do wonder why Starmer doesn't want a national inquiry. It's almost as though he's worried about what would come out from that inquiry.
And it's extraordinary that a Prime Minister, and particularly a lawyer of a Prime Minister, wouldn't want more information. Isn't that the quest that any leader, and certainly lawyer, should be signed up to? If there's more information, more things we can find out, let's go there, let's find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when he was in opposition, when he was leader of the opposition before they took government in July, he called for about 8 or 9 different inquiries on a whole range of different subjects. Since he's come into power, he's set up a whole range of different quangos and reviews of anything and everything. But on this subject, he seems to be wanting silence. And to see him whip his Labour MPs today, I think, is disgraceful. So they can't vote with their conscience. The Labour MP for Rochdale, Labour MP for Haywood and Middleton, where the victims come from, or the Rotherham MPs or elsewhere, Telford Labour MP, can't vote with the conscience. They have to vote with the Labour whip. And I think that's disgraceful.
Or lose the whip altogether if they do, of course.
Absolutely.
And a final one here, A&E in crisis. Flu cases continue to soar across the UK. Although we see this story I've seen this story on front pages for about 30 years now, I think, Simon. It never goes away. I think it was worse. I think this year's worse than last year, but not as bad as the year before. There is one agitator, though, in the story. Should Britain be worried about the HMPV virus, which is spreading in all... Who'd have thought a virus coming out of China, Simon? I can hardly believe it. But apparently that's what's happened here. We've got people in critical conditions across the world. Is it something that should concern us?
Well, you're right. There's a number of issues that are colliding here, which could create a problem for government as well as us mere mortals who are, members of the wider society, which is, as you say, you've got this flu virus going around. Then you've got this virus from China, which by all accounts is already in Britain. And then thirdly, we've got the winter fuel allowance, which has been cut quite savagely by the government. And so if the number of deaths, particularly of elderly people, increases over January, February, March because of the weather and because of these viruses, then the blame will end up landing quite squarely on Keir Starmer's doorstep.
There it is. Simon, we hit the clock, but thank you, as ever. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP.